Hey everybody, Erin Mac, BS Detector. So, I, have in my bio or my channel description, obviously more than just like conspiracy, Bible content, perfume reviews. I also am a lover of books. And, I got this one book, and it's really not even a book, it's a letter that this man, what's his name? Benjamin Freedman. Okay, his backstory is that, let's see, it goes into it somewhere, that he was, a Jewish businessman in New York City in the, he was born in 1890, so like the early 1900s was when he was in New York City doing business. He was a part owner, I think, of a soap company. And on this bio here on the book, it says that he broke with organized Jewry. I mean, I guess I'm just going to say it and we'll see what the algo does with it. But he broke with that whole, the organization of the tiny hat community, whatever that's like currently controlling things, right? Because he was Jewish himself. And so, it says he broke with organized Shmurry after the Judeo-Communist victory of 1945, which I'm assuming is the assigning of the portion of Palestine to the Zionists. Anyways, it says that he he at one time was the principal owner of the soap company. I don't know if he sold off his shares or whatever, but it says that he spent the remainder of his life and great preponderance of his considerable fortune, because he was very rich at that time, $2.5 million in the early 1900s. I mean, I don't even know how much that would be in today's money, but it is a lot. So anyway, he wrote a letter to a Dr. David Goldstein of Boston, Massachusetts, in October of 1954. Okay, so he was well into his 60s, maybe even 70s when he wrote this. Let's see, when did it say he was born? 1890, right? Yeah, 1890. So he was 64 when he wrote this letter. All right. So I don't know if I have to like claim fair use on this for fair use for use of critique or whatever, but that is what this is for. It's for the purpose of critiquing and for educational purposes. So anyways, so and this is from the National Alliance for Fair Use Only, Free Speech, June 1995, Volume 1, Number 6. Okay, this is entitled Benjamin Freedman Speaks, A Jewish Defector Warns America by Benjamin H. Freedman. This is an introductory note. Benjamin H. Freedman was once one of the most intriguing and amazing individuals of the 20th century. Mr. Freedman, born in 1890, was a successful Jewish businessman of New York City who was at one time the principal owner of Woodbury Soap Company. He broke with organized Shmurry after the Judeo-Communist victory of 1945 and spent the remainder of his life and the great preponderance of his considerable fortune, at least $2.5 million, exposing the Shmuish tyranny which has developed in the United States. And remember, this book was written in 1954, okay? So this is like old news. Mr. Freedman knew what he was talking about because he had been an insider at the highest levels of Shmuish organizations and Shmuish machinations to gain power over our nation. Mr. Freedman was personally acquainted with Bernard Baruch, Samuel Untermeyer, Woodrow Wilson, Franklin Roosevelt, Joseph Kennedy, and John F. Kennedy, and many more movers and shakers of our times. This speech was given before a patriotic audience in 1961 at the Willard Hotel in Washington, D.C. on behalf of Condon McGinley's patriotic newspaper of that time, Common Sense. Though in some minor ways, this wide-range and extemporaneous speech has become dated, Mr. Freedman's essential message to us, his warning to the West, is more urgent than ever before. So I don't know if when they put this book together to be, or this letter, together to be like put in print, but it seems, like maybe, I don't know, maybe the 70s. I honestly can't tell you. I could probably Google it and like next time I read, because I'm obviously not going to be able to read all of this at one time, but I am going to read it and comment on it. So this is just basically the introduction about the guy and kind of giving you his credentials and his, basically proving that, he is, his point of view is valid because he was in the midst of the movement and in the midst of this agenda. Though some minor ways, this wide-ranging and extemporaneous speech has become dated. Okay, Mr. Freedman's essential message to us, his warning to the West, is more urgent now than ever. Okay. Now, I don't know what KAS means. Excuse me. I moved my stoop to try to find my dog's ball. She just got diagnosed with Cushing's, and so I've been doing stuff to try to keep her busy because Cushing's has to do with like high cortisol. Anyways, so I'm trying to keep her busy so she's not a stressed out puppy. I say puppy, but she's like almost 13 years old. She's such a good girl. Anyway, so this says KAS. Here in the United States, the Schmeianists and their co-religionists, meaning like the Christians, have complete control of our government. For many reasons, too many and too complex to go into here at this time, but the Schmeianists and their co-religionists rule the United States as though they were absolute monarchs of this country. Now, you may say that this is a very broad statement, but let me show you what happened while we were all asleep. What happened? World War I broke out in the summer of 1914. There are a few people here my age who remember that. Now that World War was waged on one side by Great Britain, France, and Russia, and on the other side by Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Turkey. Within 2 years, Germany had won that war. Not only won it nominally, but won it actually. The German submarines, which were a surprise to the world, had swept all the convoys from the Atlantic Ocean. Great Britain stood there without ammunition for her soldiers, with 1 week's food supply, and after that, starvation. At that time, the French army had mutinied. They had lost 600,000 of the flower of French youth in the defense of Verdun on the Somme. The Russian army was defecting. They were picking up their toys and going home. They didn't want to play war anymore, and they didn't like the Tsar. And the Italian army had collapsed. Not a shot had been fired on German soil. Not one enemy soldier had crossed the border into Germany, and yet Germany was offering England peace terms. They offered England a negotiated peace on what the lawyers called a status quo ante basis. That means, basically, let's call the war off and let everything be as it was before the war started. England, in the summer of 1916, was considering that seriously. They had no choice. It was either accepting this negotiated peace that Germany was magnanimously offering them, or go on with the war and being totally defeated. While that was going on, the Schmeianists in Germany, who represented the Schmeianists from Eastern Europe, went to the British War Cabinet and, I'm going to be brief because it's a long story, but I have all the documents to prove any statement that I make. They said, look here, you can yet win this war. You don't have to give up. You don't have to accept the negotiated peace offered to you by Germany. You can win this war if the United States will come in you as your ally. Now you see how the Schmeianists are like playing both sides and dragging the U.S. into this war for like no reason. Like, Britain was going to just say, okay, we'll just, what was the status quo ante. Okay, which basically means, like, we'll just pretend this never happened, and we'll just go back about our lives like nothing ever happened. And Britain was going to say yes to that, but then the Schmionists talked Britain into being like, no, we're not going to take that peace offer. We're going to let the U.S. get involved and let their sons and daughters die for Schmionism. Do you see how old and tired and played out this whole game is? It's like, wake up, America. Anyways, so okay, the Schmionists in Germany, who represent the Schmionists from Europe. Okay, so we got to, okay, the United States was not in the war at the time. We had nothing to do with it. Our name was Bennett. We wasn't in it. And it says here, we were fresh, we were young, we were rich, we were powerful, they told England. We will guarantee to bring the United States into the war as your ally to fight with you on your side if you will promise us Palestine after you win the war. In other words, they made this deal. We will get the United States into this war as your ally, and the price you must pay is Palestine after you have won the war and defeated Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Turkey. Now England had about as much right to promise Palestine to anybody as the United States would have to promise Japan to Ireland for any reason whatsoever. Like, it was very strange. I mean, I don't know, maybe they were, because, you know, also we know that the royals, they're all crypto schmooze, okay? This is more about an occult group of people that do all kinds of weird practices, like keeping it in the family, you know what I'm saying? Which is why, like, if you look, like, at the Habsburgs, they were some of the part of the royal families back in the day. They had something that was called the Habsburg job, where it kind of like, it was like an inbreeding defect or something. So anyways, and this is like all of the monarchies or whatever in Europe are either of the same bloodlines as these people, which that's another thing, is that they are not who they say they are in any sense of the word. And a lot of Christians falsely believe that just because the geopolitical, I feel like even, dare I say, illegal state of Israel exists, that they are the same ones that are the Israel from the Old Testament, and nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, that's just a blatant lie. And I think that'll be exposed here in this letter that Mr. Freedman wrote to his doctor friend in 1954. Okay, so where was I? Okay. We will get the United States into this war as your ally. The price you must pay is Palestine after you have won the war and defeated Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Turkey. Now, England had about as much right to promise Palestine to anybody as the United States would have to promise Japan to Ireland for any reason whatsoever. It's absolutely absurd that Great Britain, that never had any connection or any interest or any right in what is known as Palestine, should offer it as a coin of the realm to pay the Schmionists for bringing the United States into the war. However, they did make that promise in October of 1916, and shortly after that, I don't know how many here remember it. This guy is obviously writing to peers of this time, maybe in the 1950s or 60s. I'm not really sure. Okay. I don't know how many here remember it. The United States, which was almost totally pro-German, entered the war as Britain's ally. Isn't that weird? Like, we weren't even allied with the British, you know? We were more allied with Germany, but we went to war against them because the schmooze and their influence and money, you know? I mean, like, I think probably the British Crown is one of the obviously richest maybe is the richest monarchy in all of the land. So, and all these people at the end of the day are connected. Like, let's just be so for real, friends. So anyways, next paragraph. I say that the United States was almost totally pro-German because the newspapers were controlled by the schmooze. The bankers were the schmooze. All the media of mass communications in this country are controlled by the schmooze. And they, the Schmooze, were also pro-German. They were pro-German because many of them had come from Germany, and they also wanted to see Germany lick the Tsar. The Schmooze didn't like the Tsar, and they didn't want Russia to win this war. These German Schmoo bankers, like Kuhn Loeb and other big banking firms in the United States, refused to finance France or England to the extent of $1. They stood aside and they said, as long as France and England are tied up with Russia, not 1 cent. But they poured money into Germany, and they fought beside Germany against Russia, trying to lick the Tsarist regime. Now, those same schmooze, when they saw the possibility of getting Palestine, went to England and they made this deal. At that time, everything changed, like a traffic light that changes from red to green, where the newspapers had been all pro-German, where they'd been telling the people of the difficulties that Germany was having with fighting Great Britain, commercially and other respects. All of a sudden, the Germans were no good. They were the villains. They were the Huns. They were shooting Red Cross nurses. They were cutting off babies' hands. They were no good. Shortly after that, Mr. Wilson declared war on Germany. I would assume Woodrow. The Schmionists in London had sent cables to the United States to Justice Brandeis saying, go to work on President Wilson. We're getting from England what we want. Now, you go to work on President Wilson and get the United States into this war. That's how the United States got into the war. We had no more interest in it. We had no more right to be in it than we have to be on the moon tonight instead of this room. There was absolutely no reason for World War I to be our war. We were railroaded into it. And if I can be vulgar, we were suckered into it. That you can tell this is definitely an old school book, because if saying we were suckered into it as being vulgar, then yeah, these were days gone by. But that just goes to show that even like today, this is not new, and that people need to wake up and realize, like, it might even be too late. I don't want to be like a doom-pilled person. I want to still have some believe in the hopium or whatever, but like, it's just kind of crazy. Okay. So he says, if he can be vulgar, we were suckered into it. That war merely so that the Schmionists of the world could obtain Palestine. That is something that the people of the United States have never been told. They never knew why we went to World War I. After we got into the war, the Schmionists went to Great Britain and said, well, we performed our part of the agreement. Let's have something in writing that shows that you're going to keep your bargain and give us Palestine after you win this war. And they didn't know whether the war would last another year or another 10 years. So they started to work out a receipt. The receipt took the form of a letter, which was worded in very cryptic language so that the world at large wouldn't know what it was all about. And that was called the Balfour Declaration. The Balfour Declaration was merely Great Britain's promise to pay the Schmionists what they had agreed upon as a consideration for getting the United States into the war. So this great Balfour Declaration that you hear so much about is just as phony as a $3 bill. I don't think I could make it more emphatic than that. This is where all the trouble started. The United States got in the war. The United States crushed Germany. You know what happened? And when the war ended and the Germans went to Paris for the Paris Peace Conference in 1919, there were 117 schmooze there as a delegation representing the schmooze headed by Bernard Baruch. And I was there. I ought to know. Now what happened? The schmooze at that peace conference, when they were cutting up Germany and parceling out Europe to all these nations who claimed a right to a certain part of the European territories, said, how about Palestine for us? And they produced for the first time to the knowledge of the Germans this Balfour Declaration. So the Germans for the first time realized, oh, so that was the game. That's why the United States came into the war. The Germans for the first time realized that they were defeated. They suffered the terrific reparations that were slapped onto them because the Schmionists wanted Palestine and were determined to get it at any cost. That brings us to another very interesting point. When the Germans realized this, they naturally resented it. Up to that time, the schmooze had never been off in another country in the world than they had been in Germany. You had Mr. Ronthano there, who was maybe 100 times as important in industry and finance as Bernard Baruch in this country. You had Mr. Ballin, who owned the two big steamship lines, the North German Lloyds and the Hamburg American lines. You had Mr. Bleichroeder, who was the banker for the Hohenzollern family. Hohenzollern family. You had the Warburgs in Hamburg, who were the big merchant bankers, the biggest in the world. The Schmoos were doing very well in Germany, no question about that. The Germans felt, well, that was quite a sellout. Isn't this crazy? Isn't actual history crazy? And this is how you find out about it. You read things that were written as letters, that were written from an on-the-ground point of view from one person to another person, not something that was like a newspaper story that's meant for all the world's eyes to see. No, this was like, private communication between two men here. It was a sellout that might be compared to this hypothetical situation, okay? Suppose the United States was at war with the Soviet Union, and we are winning. And we told the Soviet Union, well, let's quit. We offer you peace terms. Let's forget the whole thing. Let's just forget about it. And all of a sudden, Red China comes into the war as an ally of the Soviet Union. And throwing them into the war brought about your defeat. A crushing defeat with reparations, the likes of which man's imagination cannot encompass. Imagine then that after that defeat, if we found out that it was the Chinese in this country, our Chinese citizens, who all the time we thought were loyal citizens, working with us, were selling us out to the Soviet Union, and that it was through them that Red China was brought into the war against us. How would we feel then in the United States against the Chinese? Do you see? I don't think that one of them would dare show his face on any street. There wouldn't be enough convenient lampposts to take care of them. Imagine how we would feel. Well, that's how the Germans felt toward these schmoos. They'd been so nice to them from like 1905 on, when the first communist revolution in Russia failed and the schmoos had to scramble out of Russia. They all went to Germany, and Germany gave them refuge, and they were treated very nicely. And here they had sold Germany down the river for no reason at all other than the fact that they wanted Palestine as a so-called schmooish commonwealth. Now, Nahum Sokolov and all the great leaders and great names that you read about in connection with Shmayanism today in 1919, 1920, 1921, 1922, and 1923 wrote in all their papers, and the press was filled with their statements, that the feeling against the schmoos in Germany is due to the fact that they realized that this great defeat was brought on by schmooist intersection in bringing the United States into the war. The schmoos themselves admitted that. It wasn't that the Germans in 1919 discovered a glass of schmooish blood tasted better than Coca-Cola or Münchner beer. There was no religious feeling. None. There was no sentiment against those people who merely on account of their religious belief. It was all political. It was economic. It was anything but religious. But see, that's how they today, these Shmayanists, they have like literally brainwashed multiple generations into thinking that this all has to do with the Bible, okay? It doesn't. It doesn't. And I'm going to further prove that on this channel. If you just hit subscribe, follow, I'm going to be doing readings proving how what we are told on the news is such a huge lie, you guys. It's such a huge lie. And it's because these schmoos own all of it. They own this app right here, which is why I'm having to say schmoos instead of the real word. And hopefully maybe the algo doesn't pick up on that. I don't know. And I don't know how long I'm going to make these readings. I guess maybe I'll go until my battery dies, because I'm recording this on my phone. So anyway, okay. Let's see. As for, okay. Nobody cared in Germany whether a shmoo went home and pulled down the shades and said Shema Yisrael or Our Father. Nobody cared in Germany any more than they do in the U.S. Now, this feeling that developed later in Germany was due to one thing. The Germans held the shmoos responsible for their crushing defeat. That's all. It had to do with politics and economics, not religion. And the shmoos want to act like they're just so religiously persecuted. And that is a lie that people's eyes need to be open to. Christians, non-Christians, atheists, agnostics. I'm pretty sure the Muslims know. But, then again, also maybe not, because the shmoos also own their media and everything that they hear. So all they hear is that we are the great Satan, because our military has been hijacked by the shmoos to do their dirty work. And this has been happening since World War I. Since World War I. And what exactly happened with the shmoos and their country being defeated and them being seen as the scourge of the world for the Schmolocaust, okay? That is coming to this country. This is me warning you, okay? That these Noahide laws that are incoming, all of this that I'm reading to you right now is explaining to you how this is coming and why this is coming. So please, even, if y'all want me to do this like a little bit more like ASMR like reading, I don't care. I mean, I'm trying not to have my normal, harsh, loud, like forceful tone, my authoritative tone. I'm trying to just kind of be chill in my reading and not be like a total psycho. Anyways, so as I was reading, and World War I had been started against Germany for no reason for which Germany was responsible. They were guilty of nothing, only of being successful. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound like what's happening with our country right now and where you see President Trump taking us right now? Because I feel like at this point, most Americans that were for Trump, even whether you were for him in the first election or not, some switched, and there was a lot of people that did come over to the Trump side. I'm not political. I've never voted a day in my life. I think it's an exercise in futility. However, a lot of the promises that he has made are not being kept, and I think that your average even Trump voter now is starting to realize this, and this is why, okay? This is why. So follow along. I'm going to make these in parts so that, like, if you catch this on whatever reading that I'm doing, that you can, I'm going to make a catalog basically of this reading here, okay? So Germany was basically guilty of being successful, and that's about it, all right? And they were used, and then they were thrown away, and then they were basically robbed. Also, usury was a huge problem, of which the Austrian painter had a problem with them after all of this. They act like it was religious persecution, and it wasn't, y'all. It just wasn't. So, okay, they built up a big navy. They built up world trade. You must remember that Germany at the time of the French Revolution consisted of 300 small city-states, principalities, dukedoms, and so forth. 300 separate little political entities. And between that time, between the times of the Napoleon and Bismarck, they were consolidated into one state. And within 50 years, they became one of the world's greatest powers. Their navy was rivaling Great Britain's. They were doing business all over the world. They could undersell anybody. They could make better products. What happened as a result of that? There was a conspiracy between England, France, and Russia to slap down Germany. There isn't one historian in the world who can find a valid reason why three countries decided to wipe Germany off the map politically. When Germany realized that the schmoos were responsible for her defeat, they naturally resented it. But not a hair on the head of any schmoo was harmed. Not a single hair. Professor Tanzel of Georgetown University, who had access to all the secret papers of the State Department, wrote in his book and quoted from a State Department document written by Hugo Schoenfeld, a schmoo whom Cordell Hull sent to Europe in 1933 to investigate the so-called camps of political prisoners. Okay, remember the whole Schmolikost, okay, political prisoners, who wrote back that he found them in very fine condition. They were in excellent shape, with everybody treated well, and they were filled with communists. Well, a lot of them were schmooze, because schmooze happened to comprise about 98% of communists in Europe at that time. And that is also no coincidence that our whole political left has gone full commie, because it's been taken over by schmooist leftist ideology, while our political right has been taken over by schmooist schmionist ideology. I hope you're picking up what I'm laying down, friends. Okay, and there were some priests there, and ministers, and labor leaders, and masons, and others who had international affiliations. Some background is in order, okay? 1918 to 1919, the communists took over Bavaria for a few days. Only a few days. Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht and a group of other schmooze took over the government for 3 days. In fact, when the Kaiser ended the war, he fled to Holland because he thought the communists were going to take over Germany as they did Russia, and then he was going to meet the same fate as the Tsar. So he fled to Holland for safety and for security. And after the communist threat in Germany was quashed, the schmooze were still working, trying to get back into their former status, and the Germans fought them in every way that they could without hurting a single hair on anyone's head. They forgot them the same way in this country. The prohibitionists fought anyone who was interested in liquor. They didn't fight one another with pistols. Well, that's the way they were fighting the schmooze in Germany. And at that time, mind you, there were 80 to 90 million Germans, okay? And there were only like 460,000 schmooze. About 1/2% of the population of Germany were schmooze. And yet they controlled all the press. They controlled the most of the economy because they had come in with cheap money. The mark was devalued and brought up practically everything, okay? The schmooze tried to keep a lid on this fact. They didn't want the world to really understand that they had sold out Germany and that the Germans resented that. And I think they succeeded in keeping that secret, because to this day, in every school in America, and probably every westernized school, including like Australia, Europe, wherever, the Schmolikost is taught, okay? When you can come for me if you want to, but this guy right here said it didn't happen. And there's also a guy named Ernst Zundel, okay? And he said that it didn't happen and then was magically just unalived, okay? Under weird circumstances. I'll just say that, all right? So the Germans took appropriate action against the schmooze. They, shall I say, discriminated against them in whatever way they could. They shunned them, okay? So after a while, the schmooze of the world called a meeting in Amsterdam. Schmooze from every country in the world attended this meeting in July 1933. I'm sorry, my foot just hit the tripod. Okay, let me fix. Okay. So, the schmooze from every country in the world attended this meeting in Amsterdam in July of 1933. And they said to Germany, you fire Hitler and you put every schmoo back into his former position, whether he was a communist or no matter what he was. You can't treat us that way. And we are the schmoos of the world. Are serving an ultimatum upon you. Can you imagine what the Germans told them? So, I mean, that's pretty big order. Like, after they totally screwed them over, used them up, bet against them, like, on both sides, kind of, you know what I mean? Then they hit them with an ultimatum that they basically let them back in the country, okay, in every sector, including banking, which was usury, which had already drained Germany of all their resources and all this stuff, right? They were like, if give us all our jobs back, basically, and regardless of whether he was a communist or not. And you got to remember, back in this day, even in America, like, communism was not, I mean, it was something that, like, you could not publicly be, okay, in the town square. You were literally shunned for being a communist because it was such a, I don't want to say, it was a fresh thing. Like, everybody had just seen what happened, like, in the Bolshevik Revolution. You know what I mean? So, like, everybody knew that lots and lots of people died under communism, and so nobody wanted anything to do with it. And nobody wanted anything to do with communists because, I mean, you see how even their policies, like, look at places like LA, okay? Look at some of these Democrat-run cities, and I'm not political, like I said, but the Democrats are the party that is used to bring this Marxist, you know, socialist, communist ideology into the West, and it's being pushed at every major university in this country, and I fear that a lot of it is also starting to be pushed in grades younger and younger, but I digress on that, okay? So, back to what we were imagining what the Jews were telling, I mean, not the Jews, what the Germans were telling the schmooze, okay, to do. They probably told them to go F themselves. So, and I think that we know that they did, because in 1933, it says, when Germany refused to surrender to the World Conference of Schmooze in Amsterdam, the conference broke up, and Mr. Samuel Untermeyer, who was the head of the American delegation and the president of the whole conference, came to the United States and went from the steamer to the studios of the Columbia Broadcasting System and made a radio broadcast throughout the United States in which he said, in effect, "The schmooze of the world now declare a holy war against Germany. We are now engaged in a sacred conflict against the Germans, and we are going to starve them into surrender. We are going to use a worldwide boycott against them that will destroy them because they are dependent upon their export business. And it is a fact that 2/3 of Germany's food supply had to be imported. And so it could only be imported with the proceeds of what they exported. So if Germany could not export, 2/3 of Germany's population would have to starve. There was not enough food for more than 1/3 of the population. There just wasn't. So now in this declaration, which I have here and which was printed in the New York Times on August 7th, 1933, Mr. Samuel Untermeyer boldly stated that this economic boycott is our means of self-defense. President Roosevelt has advocated its use in the National Recovery Administration, which some of you may remember, where everybody was to be boycotted unless he followed the rules laid down by the New Deal, and which was declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court of that time. Nevertheless, the schmooze of the world declared a boycott against Germany. And it was so effective that you couldn't find one thing in any store in the world with the words "Made in Germany" on it. In fact, an executive of the Woolworth Company told me that they had to dump millions of dollars worth of crockery and dishes into the river, that their stores were boycotted if anyone came in and found a dish marked "Made in Germany." They were picketed with a sign saying Hitler or Schmurderer and so forth. Something like these sit-ins that are taking place in the South. At a store belonging to the R.H. Macy chain, which was controlled by a family called Strauss, who happened to also be schmooish, a woman found stockings there which came from Chemnitz marked "Made in Germany." Well, they were cotton stockings, and they may have been there 20 years, since I've been observing women's leggings for many years, and it's been a long time since I've seen any cotton stockings on them. I think he's saying that a little tongue-in-cheek. I saw Macy's boycotted, with hundreds of people walking around with signs saying "Schmurderers," Hitlerites, and so forth. Now, up to that time, not one hair on the head of any schmoo had been hurt in Germany. There was no suffering, there was no starvation, there was no schmurder, there was nothing. Naturally, the Germans said, "Who are these people to declare a boycott against us and throw all our people out of work and make our industries come to a standstill? Who are they to do that to us?" And they naturally resented it. Certainly, they painted swastikas on stores owned by schmooze. Why should a German go in and give his money to a storekeeper who was part of a boycott that was going to starve Germany into surrendering to the schmooze of the world. So they were basically putting those swastikas on there, which is an ancient symbol also. Like, y'all think it's like some neo-Nazi, like they originated it. No, they didn't. It's like an Eastern, some sort of Eastern religion, okay? I think that was like originally where the swastika came from, right? And that was just their sign of letting people know, hey, don't shop here. Don't give these people your money. Like, because they were being boycotted by these very self-same people who are in their country still doing them harm. So they were just voting with their dollars. That was all that was about. It wasn't about marking them as like subhuman or anything like they try to do to us and call us goy and feed us goy slop and all this crap. It was nothing like that. It was literally just a marking of telling people where and where not to shop. Basically using free market strategies to protect themselves from being devoured from within. Okay? Let's see. So the boycott, well, let's see. Why would a German go on and live in this, give his money to a storekeeper who was part of a boycott that was going to starve him into surrendering to the schmooze of the world, who were going to dictate who their premier or chancellor was to be? This was ridiculous. The boycott continued for some time, but it wasn't until 1938 when a young shmoo from Poland walked into the German embassy in Paris and shot a German official. And the Germans really started to get rough with the schmoos in Germany. And you found them breaking windows and having street fights and so forth. Now, I don't like to use the word anti-Semitism because it's meaningless, and I totally agree. Even still today, it's meaningless. But it means something to you, so I'll have to use it. The only reason that there was any feeling in Germany against the schmooze was that they were responsible for World War I and for this worldwide boycott. Ultimately, they were also responsible for World War II because after this, things got out of hand. It was absolutely necessary for the schmooze and Germany to lock horns in a war to see which one was going to survive. In the meanwhile, I had lived in Germany, and I knew that the Germans had decided that Europe is going to be Christian or communist. There is no in-between. And the Germans decided they were going to keep it Christian if possible. And they started to rearm. In November 1933, the United States recognized the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was becoming very powerful. And Germany realized that our turn was going to come soon unless we are strong. The same as we in this country are saying today. Our turn is soon going to come unless we are strong. Basically, and look at what they've already done to the military. Letting these deviants, okay? I'm not trying to be rude, but like the whole shapeshifter thing, like this stuff, like I'm not with it. I mean, if you're a grown-ass adult, you do what you want to, but the targeting of children, and then also you get to join the military and all of your surgeries are just paid for and all this stuff. This is what I'm saying. Even these very ideologies, they are all coming from the schmooze. Now, am I telling you to hate all the schmooze? No. What are we supposed to do? I am a total, nonviolent. I'm for nonviolence here on this channel. We are to pray for our enemies, but you have to at least know who your enemy is, okay? And these people are not for us, okay? And Christians need to wake up to this fact. All right. I'm going to read down to the bottom of this paragraph, and then I'm going to stop the video, try to stop it at 45 minutes, okay? So, after they started to rearm, after they decided they were going to keep Germany Christian, the Soviet Union was becoming very powerful, okay? So, and then they realized that if they didn't beef up their military like the Soviet Union was, Germany decided this, that they were going to lose their country as well. So, our government spending here, and this was at the time of the writing in this book, says 83 or 84 billion dollars for defense. For defense against whom? Defense against 40,000 little schmoos in Moscow that took over Russia, and then in their devious ways took over control of many other countries of the world. And that's the other thing that's terrifying, you guys, is like there is such a small, minute amount of these people, and they are trying to enslave All of us, the whole entire world. Now let me mark this point in the book, in the letter, I mean, okay? And I will come back and pick up where we left off. We haven't even made it to the main part of the letter. We're still in the introduction, but I don't want to make this any longer than 45 minutes because I don't even know who watches videos that long anymore. We'll see. And if I have to break this down into smaller readings, I will. But anyways, I hope you be blessed, and please subscribe, like the video, comment down below if you have anything to add, or any comments. All right. You guys have a good one.